Welcome back, everyone, to Vox Markets. My name is Paul Hill, and I'm delighted again to be able to speak to Adam Hill, CEO of Oncimmune, a leading immunodiagnostics firm. So welcome, Adam.
Good to see you again, Paul. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, well, lots been happening over the past few months since we last spoke, not least plenty of excellent contract news for the ImmunoINSIGHTS service alongside the prelims on Tuesday. But before we sort of dig into the details, and I suppose you could quickly remind investors by walking us through sort of like a typical real-life example of how the ImmunoINSIGHTS service is used in the field by big biopharma companies.
Yeah, no problem. So investors will have to remember that autoantibodies are really good for two things. They're really good for detecting disease early, and we utilize that benefit of these biomarkers for our early detection business. And they're also really good at picking the right patients for the right therapy at the right time. A lot of people have spoken about personalized medicines, stratified medicine. This is it in the flesh. We use through our ImmunoINSIGHTS service the platform technology that we've developed over the last 20 years, reliant on autoantibodies, to receive samples from patients that are on clinical trials and analyze those samples. And we analyze those samples using one or other of our proprietary technologies, Serotype or Navigate. Serotype is our high throughput discovery technology, which means it rapidly moves through our library and finds out where the likely binding events are going to be between antigen and antibody, or our Navigate panels, which are highly tailorable but off-the-shelf panels that we've developed in advance. There are common questions, of course, that we get asked, and so we've productized the answer to those questions, if you like, in these Navigate panels, which does a similar sort of thing. It identifies the binding events between antibody and antigen, and in both cases they present a heat map of binding events, just a map of colors that then can be analyzed by response models, or data science models, or bioinformatics models, whatever you want to call it. These are the models that have been handcrafted internally by our very clever data scientists to analyze those heat maps and derive some form of interpretation from it. And it's that interpretation that we then go back to the customer with. We charge 1,080 euros a pop. That's non-negotiable. Okay. It's always the same. It's always the same case. And we work with everyone from biotechs working in the preclinical space right down, before these things even get into the clinic, all the way up to pharmaceutical companies going through phase 2A, 2B, 3, and even into the real world, where they're trying to surveil the impact that those drugs are having, not just positive, but also the side effect profile. So it's a great little business driven out of our labs in Dortmund, Germany. Highly profitable. It has been for the first 6 months of this year, as it was for the whole of last year. To remind your listeners, of that 1,080 euros that comes in at the top of the funnel per sample, 85% of that's dropping down to the bottom line. So it's a brilliant little business. And whilst the world has been pretty slow over the summer, not just in pharma services, but look, the equity capital markets were pretty slow over the summer as well. I think people were taking a long Grecian beach holiday this year, whereas maybe they hadn't in the past.
Me.
Not you, nor me either. Nor me. I was pedaling hard, trying to win business. But I tell you, since the 1st of September, with everyone back in their seats, this thing's been growing like topsies. So we're really, really happy with it. I'm really excited about the future.
So if I've got, let's just say I'm one of the big biotech companies, and I don't know, something like Merck or something, and I'm just, if I've got a new big immunotherapy in the pipeline that I want to actually be able to bind it to a cancer somewhere, I don't know, lung cancer or colon cancer or whatever like that, then if I have that sort of, like, I'm looking for a biomarker on the actual cancer to be able to attach it, are you saying the panels that you actually or in ImmunoINSIGHTS do will tell me how effective and what the safety profile is of that immunotherapy?
Well, look, you're right to point to immunotherapies, because, of course, we're focused on 3 disease domains: cancer, autoimmune disease, and infectious diseases, all of which are amenable to immune modulation, or the use of drugs that affect your immune system to kill or render the disease less harmful.
Yeah.
So those are the disease domains. The way in which we typically get approached is because there's a question either in the preclinical space about how well a candidate, so not a therapy in clinical development yet, but a candidate drug, just a chemical really with some known properties, is going to bind to the particular targets. Mm-hmm. That's one question we get asked. Another question we get asked is, now with the candidate as a therapy moving through clinical trials, why are we seeing the sorts of efficacy that we're seeing in this group, but not that group?
Right.
We're all different.
And that's the personalized medicine you were talking about.
That's the personalized medicine. And then a bit further on down the pipeline, and we get there's a subset of our patients that we're seeing side effects in that we hadn't anticipated. Either we hadn't anticipated the side effect, or we hadn't anticipated this group would suffer this side effect. So can you help us try and understand why that might be the case?
And is that, just for example, that's like long COVID or something like that, if you've got an infectious disease? So if somebody's got COVID and then their immune response has been really quite tough, in fact, they might have got the COVID storm, as in when they were in hospital, or alternatively, they're then suffering afterwards, and that's because it's an immune response. Effectively, the ImmunoINSIGHTS could help in that respect as well? Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I mean, COVID had both its downside, tremendous downside, of course, but also there were positives that came out of our response to it. And for us, one of the substantial positives is that we were funded by the British government to help and support with the R&D effort. And we're funded to develop an infectious disease panel. I mean, read COVID, I think, for the purposes of the grant, but that panel that we developed and now are completing the validation on is a far broader panel for focus, so that we can capture a lot of different infectious diseases. And the reason for that is because a number of these infectious diseases have immune-related side effects, or indeed signs and symptoms that look a lot like autoimmune disease, where your body is attacking itself. And that's a great starting point for us, because it suggests that the biological mechanisms are similar to those that we're capturing using our panels. And so with Cedars-Sinai, our partner on the west coast of the US, big academic health science center out of LA, we've been developing these panels and exposing these panels to samples from patients that have got COVID, patients that have been vaccinated, patients that have an autoimmune disease and then have got COVID, patients that have gone on to get long-term or chronic side effects or sequelae of COVID, and started to unpick the very complex immune response to the disease in those different circumstances. And you'll have already seen a small handful of papers that have come out of us and our academic collaborators at Cedars-Sinai into the public domain. And quite honestly, I'm really proud of the team because of the work that we've been able to do, and that has contributed meaningfully to our global knowledge base and quite frankly, the response to the disease. But there's so much more to do. So much more to understand, and we're swamped with the work that we're currently.
Well, that's a great expression. I love that. So just for investors to put a bit of sort of top level color on it. So how big is this market? If we're moving towards more personalized medicine and genomic sequencing, and we can find more biomarkers for relevant conditions, whether it's to identify antigens, whether it's attached to actual foreign bodies, or the immune response likewise. How just hypothetically, how big is this potential sort of nascent, fast-growing market?
I think there's a number of different ways of cutting it. Certainly, one way that we use quite frequently internally with investors is to think of the number of clinical trials that are being run on an annual basis. And certainly, there are 5,000 or 6,000 clinical trials in just cancer alone being run on an annual basis. About 2,000 in autoimmune disease, about 3,000 infectious diseases. And so you might expect every single one of those trials to be recruiting tens, hundreds, maybe even thousands of patients, and every single patient donating 2 to maybe even 10 blood samples, which gives you a very large number or an even larger number. So it's big, whatever way you cut it. To give you a sense, we estimate that currently we're only tackling somewhere between 2 and 3% of the opportunity. And quite honestly, we reach left and right. And I think I've said this to you before, and we don't bump into competitors. We know they're there. We know that there are others doing something similar or going after the same dollar with a different technology. But there's so much opportunity out there that at the moment we're just not bumping into each other.
So just coming on to that one perfectly, sort of like the growth strategy for ImmunoINSIGHTS, the whole service. I noticed you actually raised £9 million a few months back at 180p. Can you just walk us through the actual expansion strategy to be able to meet this demand?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I mean, there are really two components to this machine, the ImmunoINSIGHTS scene. There's obviously the demand generation component, and there's the delivery component. And what we wanted to do in the first instance is get the delivery component right. We've got some excellent scientists. I mean, really high class German educated scientists out of the Fraunhofer and other institutes that have been working in this space for 10, maybe even 20 years in some cases. And so they are world experts. But we needed to move the organization from being very much, an academic lab or a cottage industry to something that had scale to it, that we could turn the handle on and really deliver a volume of samples each year. And so the investment went into replicating the existing line. That's replicating the CapEx in the same footprint, our labs in Dortmund, Germany, with a mirroring team, one for one. We've mirrored every single one of those skill sets. And in so doing, we're moving from sort of a capacity of about 6,000 samples a year to about capacity of 40,000 samples a year, all told, at flat chat, right? I mean, our utilization of that, we expect to be about 70 to 75%. Last year, we were running at about 60 to 65%. So there's some operational efficiencies that need to be achieved. And so we've now moved on to that stage of the program, putting in place those operational efficiencies.
So just running the numbers, it's 40,000 samples, 75% utilization. That's a throughput effectively of 30,000.
That's right.
And just over €1,000 a shot.
That's right.
So that's basically about €31 million turnover, I guess.
That's right. That's right. That's the capacity.
And an 85% drop through rate as well.
Exactly.
Well, if you hit that, you're going to be very profitable.
And why I'm smiling,
if you hit that, you're going to be very profitable, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is a really, really nice opportunity for us. But on the other side of the house, of course, you've got to fill the pipeline. When we spoke in May, we were at about 160 qualified opportunities. Last count, beginning of this week, were 196 qualified opportunities. We reckon that we're going to have to be putting out, in order to maximize that capacity, about 4 times the number of proposals that we're currently putting out. Right. And so that demand generation team is absolutely critical. Only a couple of weeks ago, we employed a guy on the West Coast of the US. We brought a new chief business officer based out of Boston. We've just employed another guy out of New Jersey. And I was interviewing yesterday a guy in Pittsburgh who I think would be a brilliant addition to the team also. So the BD team, the demand generation team, continues to grow. Importantly, that team is focused where the majority of our customers are in the US, and so we've made the investment now in setting up the US entity and starting to fill it with really talented BD folk to stack that pipeline.
And why is it so sort of like popular? Why is the demand so much in the US? I did see in the RNS that it's the vast majority, isn't it, of sort of like of proposals. I mean, is it because of just the heritage, big sort of biopharmas out there on the East and the West Coast?
Yeah, I think even if we're dealing with European brands, the likes of Sanofi and Novartis and Roche, we actually are tending to contract out of the US, where where they may have their R&D teams with a particular focus on these areas based. That's where demand is often generated, either safety teams, translational teams, or the R&D teams. And in the main, they're situated in the US, irrespective of where the company's domiciled.
Right. Oh, okay, fine. So how many more people do you need in your US team then to get to a full contingent? Have you got sort of first half dozen or so?
Yeah, that's right. So our BD team now, I think, is around about 6, focused on ImmunoINSIGHTS. Sort of PhD scientist level, 20 years in selling pharma services. So really experienced guys. And you'd expect each of them to be doing, a couple of $million dollars a year of revenue.
Okay.
Right? A couple to a few $1 million a year of revenue. So these aren't cheap team members, of course. They come at a price, but I think well worth the investment. Certainly, there's a couple more that we want to add to the team. I think that's not to suggest that we aren't already at critical mass and that team isn't gelling and starting to generate meaningful revenue. It is, but there's a couple of gaps that currently they're filling that I think actually warrant a new head. So if we hired another 3 or 4 in support of those hunters, if you like, I wouldn't be too surprised over the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay. And are there any sort of like new investments in R&D at all? Not R&D, but in the product capability, or the service capability, because or are you really just going full bore on the demand side and the effectively infrastructure side at Dortmund?
I was asked a similar question, Paul, when we did our results, and the question was, why is the R&D budget equivalent to last year's and the year before? Why are you static at sort of 1.5 for a forward-thinking company? We'd expect you to be spending more. And actually, we are doing more R&D, but with less money, because we're doing it on someone else's dollar. With every single one of these contracts that we're landing, of course, we're learning and we're developing and we're building out our offering. We're tailoring it, making it more focused for future customers, and we're deepening our relationship. We don't deliver 100% of the contract. Our delivery teams are mandated to go and deliver 130% on every one of those contracts, and so we always over deliver, and therefore we never lose a customer. 100% retention rate.
So effectively what you're saying is that every single sample you actually put through the actual system, you're building a deeper, more sort of like better biobank of information that then can be resold, and you're effectively increasing your barriers to entry from competitors.
Everything that comes in, adds to the knowledge base, which means that we can offer a better service to those that are customers moving forward, and we can use examples of knowledge that we've learned elsewhere to better focus a project with a big pharmaceutical company or a biotech or an academic partner, and indeed that knowledge base is going to continue to grow.
You're speaking my language, but I'm an accountant, you see, so I love that. Now, just finally then, sort of like the possible sort of further news flow going forward. I mean, obviously we've had a good start to Q2. Is there likely to be any sort of like contract news flow? Because we've had quite a few contracts, and considering it was quite a period. You've had some pretty good contracts actually. So if it gets a bit busier, there's going to be a deluge presumably.
Yeah, we are busy. We're going to be definitely we're going to definitely need to present to the market new contracts over the coming months. One of the challenges that we have at the moment is that a number of our pharma customers don't want us to talk about their brand, the project that we're working on, because these things are sensitive. And I see that as testament to the value that we're adding. We're increasingly being asked to do things that are closer to the core. We're being trusted with more and more valuable knowledge and data, and it is sensitive. So I can understand that, and I'm afraid investors are just going to have to bear with us. We will, of course, flag when we've signed contracts. But if there's a lack of information, that's not because we don't want to put the information out, but we're constrained to a degree as to what we can put out to the public domain.
Well, it's certainly an exciting time. I see house broker Singers, he's got just over £12 million of turnover. And then you'll also be EBITDA positive as well for the year. So could be a real sort of like big breakthrough year for the company.
Yeah, consensus is well within our target, our focus. And, we feel pretty confident that we're going to be getting there.
Brilliant. Well, thanks very much for your time, Adam, and look forward in hearing how the business progresses, certainly over the next 12 months. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. Take care.